Well, good morning. Great to be back with you on a Wednesday, Breakfast with Jesus. So glad you could take some time out of your busy life and come and hang out for a little bit. Yeah, it's great. I'm so grateful to have you along. And if you're watching the recording and I don't get to say hello to you, well, just know I appreciate so much everyone that does take the time because I know, listen, we all got lives, we all have things that we need to do, and taking time out to watch a program like this, I know that's a huge thing for me and for you as well. So thank you so much. Good to be back. I hope you're doing well as we launch into a Wednesday. We are in some very interesting times. I'm telling you what. And I really hope and pray that we all are praying for God's kingdom and God's will to be done here on earth. Because, man, we need his kingdom. We need him. Good morning, Breakfast Club. Let's see. We have with us today Silvana and Patty and Jane, Michael. And it's not quite so beautiful yet here. You guys, I think you're in Ohio, so you've gotten that blast of Canadian air coming down, and we're just on the edge of it. Hasn't quite come through yet. Dee and Christina, Bernadette, good morning to all of you. Thank you so very much. So we are continuing to look at the topic of our destiny, of our purpose, as it relates to who we are as sons and daughters, and how God desires for us to be part of his plan to establish his kingdom here on the earth. And one of the ways that he will do that and is doing that is actually through how he created us, our uniqueness, the talents and abilities and giftings and all of that was intentional on his part so that we could participate with him by being creative, by accessing the creativity that is ours by virtue of us being made in his image. So again, we went back to reference his original plan back from in the book of Genesis when he first created Adam and Eve and basically said, this is what you're to do. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and rule. And that we've been restored back to that level or even a greater level of relationship with the Lord because Christ dwells in us and his blood has completely redeemed everything that Adam and Eve's sin wrought in the earth, other than, of course, the fact that these bodies still are subject to decay. But other than that, we get all the blessings and the benefits of this amazing relationship with the Lord. So we've been looking at fruitfulness, creativity, right? How it, is something that the Lord works in us through seasons. We've already looked at the winter season. If you missed that, I think I did it Friday and Monday. And so now we're kind of starting to look at the spring season where, of course, we plant seeds, right? Without planting seeds, you got no harvest to come. So, Jesus, and I mentioned yesterday, we looked at the parable of the sower in Matthew 13 and how important it is that we understand what that actually means for us. As I mentioned yesterday, traditionally that parable was interpreted to really only talk about salvation. That you could lose your salvation if you have rocky soil or if you have weeds and thorns and all that. But it's really a word about the kingdom. It's a kingdom parable teaching us what it means and what it looks like for us to become fully engaged in the things that the Lord desires to do in and through us in the kingdom. All right? So that's what we're looking at. And in this parable, of course, Jesus is talking a lot about soil and the different kinds of soil that are, there in the world, but also how what that relates to you and I, that our lives, our hearts have all these different kinds of soils in them. And so learning what that means and what we need to do to actually have all good soil, right? So that the seed of God finds a good place in us to grow and to sprout and to bear a harvest that will ultimately bring him great glory. The harvest really is when we, we are functioning fully in a particular area of our destiny, and it's really having an impact on people's lives and on the world around us. How that actions, those actions and that activity that we're engaged in, is bringing God such great glory. All right, because he's moving through us to accomplish his purposes. So when we think about soil, in the natural, obviously, preparation is key. My wife and I last year decided to take about half of our backyard and create beds, planting raised beds. Basically, I created 3 raised beds in which we could, just have some fun and experiment growing certain plants. I think last year we tried to grow some corn and it didn't quite come out the way we expected. And so, we're learning. This year it was, I think we had some squash and some melon. We always have parsley because my wife has a hobby of raising swallowtail butterflies. And so they love to lay their eggs on parsley because I guess that's one of their favorite foods. So yes, we have a sizable parsley crop every year. And we had a bumper crop of swallowtail butterflies. I think all told, when she's done, she will have raised and released somewhere in excess of 60 of these things. It's like, ay, 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 but she loves it. So anyway, we created these garden plots. And you've got to prepare the soil. You've got to mix in mulch and that kind of material to kind of amplify the nutrients in the soil so that whatever you plant there is going to thrive, right? Whether it's tomatoes, whether it's green beans, whether, we've got all these different things that we're planting. So preparation is key. And it's interesting that in the scriptures, there's this contrast between soil that is being effectively utilized and soil that is not. And the word that's used there, which, you probably have heard it, you might not be super familiar with it because not many of us are agriculturally oriented, so to speak, but the word is fallow. And the Bible talks about fallow ground and fallow soil. And the word means basically that it's just not being used. And it is part of, agricultural science says that it is good to take, a plot of land, and every so many years, sometimes it could be 5 or 6 years or 2 or 3 years. It just depends on what crop is predominantly being planted. But they advise that you should leave land uncultivated for a season so that it has a chance to rest. And so there's nothing wrong with that. That is what the winter season is all about, where, you're not really doing much except resting and receiving from the Lord. But if that condition remains, if you say, oh, I really like this, I really like just kind of sitting back and soaking in the presence of God and just, soaking in all the goodness of the Lord and, enjoying his presence and worshiping him. If that becomes your lifestyle, and you're not called to that, because there are people who are called to that kind of lifestyle because they're basically intercessors, and their job is to connect with God deeply every day so that you can pray, you can intercede, you can, do those kinds of things. And that's perfectly fine. That's your job. That's what you're called to. But can I say that the majority of us, that's not what we're called to. And so staying in that place then results in fallow ground, ground that is just not being utilized the way it's supposed to. Now, it can also, I believe, happen when we get so, we kind of get into the rut of life. I wake up, I eat breakfast, I go to work, or if I'm not working from home, I do my job. I'm done with my job, I'll have dinner, I'll watch some TV, and I'll go to sleep. There's really nothing going on because you kind of fall into this routine that you're kind of locked in. You're locked in a routine. And nothing beyond that routine is really happening for you. And that's not, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be critical or judgmental, but honestly, that's not the abundant life that God created us for. We have the freedom to do that and just kind of like, okay, here's my life, blah, blah, blah. But it's not what he desires. So understanding, that there's this responsibility to do something with the soil, with the land, the ground of our own lives, of our hearts, is so important. Now, there's a couple of scriptures that I think are so powerful and so important that we understand with regard to this idea of having fallow ground. One of them, I've mentioned this on a couple of occasions here on the program. It's Proverbs 13:23. And it says, abundant food is in the fallow ground of the poor, but it is swept away by injustice. Wow. I mean, the picture that in that scripture is so powerful. Abundant food, abundance, right? All the abundance that God has for us is right there. It's available. It's in the fallow ground of the poor. Now, you can define poor any way you want, but poor typically is simply a condition where you just feel like you never have enough, where you're always facing lack on some level. That's poverty. And, to say that, there's an abundance of resources available to you, but your ground is fallow. Your ground is not being utilized. Is not, you're not actively cultivating and seeding the ground of your life with the revelation of God, so nothing's happening. And it says that abundance is swept away by injustice. Well, what does that mean? See, this is where the enemy's lies rob us of what God desires for us. Again, if I think that all I'm going to do is spend my days soaking in God's presence and I don't do anything else, even though he's called me to other things, I just kind of like, oh no, I'm going to stay right here. Or I get, caught up in a routine in my life where that's all I do is my life routine. Both of those, instances, I'm believing a lie. I'm believing a lie in the one case that my pleasure in the presence of the Lord is really all that matters. You know what I mean? And in the other case, it's simply, well, this is my life. This is all I have. This is me. Both of those are lies. And it's an injustice that people are being robbed every day of the fullness of their purpose and destiny because of the lies of the enemy. Now, obviously, we know Jesus defeated the enemy. He's made it clear that his word is true, and we have access to truth that makes us free. So, at some time, there's going to be an accounting at some point where the Lord's going to go, well, I showed you that there's truth, and you just decided to stay, in your limited life zone, okay? And let's not do that. All right, let's not, because the Lord has so much for us. So the other verse I wanted to mention is from Hosea 10 in verse 12, where he writes, "Sow with a view to righteousness, reap in accordance with kindness. Break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord until he comes to rain righteousness on you." Now, there's just a lot of stuff in that verse. But, the upshot of it is he's saying, look, yeah, if you've got fallow ground, if the ground of your life is not being utilized to the full, in other words, if you aren't receiving revelation from the Lord and imparting that to yourself and working with that to say, Lord, I see this, I want what you are showing me. I want to have a life that looks like this revelation that you're bringing to me about what my purpose and my destiny is. Okay. That's what he's after, for us and from us, right? So, that particular verse talks about sowing and reaping. That's what we're supposed to do, right? We're to sow with the view to demonstrating to the world how good God is. That's what it means to sow with a view to righteousness, to be an example of what a right relationship with God looks like, right? And then we reap in accordance with kindness, the kindness of the Lord, right? His blessing on our lives that is so evident, where people look at that and go, wow, how did that happen? And we just simply say, it's just God. He loves us and he loves me and he's blessing me so that I can bless you, right? And all of that starts with breaking up fallow ground. So that's the question. Where is the fallow ground in my life? Because the trouble with soil is that you've got to work it, okay? We have to work the soil of our lives in order for it to become good soil. And in this parable that Jesus told, where he highlights 4 different kinds of soil, he talks about soil that's been packed down because it's a path and people walk on it and it just gets hard. Then he talked about soil that is rocky. In other words, there may be a thin layer of soil, but underneath is mostly rocks. So there's not very deep soil. You've got to have, 6 to 12 inches of good soil for a lot of crops to really develop well. Then, of course, there is soil where there's a lot of other plants that are growing, such as thorns and weeds, right? Then, of course, you've got the final one, which is the good soil. So he's using these examples to illustrate different kinds of heart conditions that we can have. And, in the parable, the way he lays it out, it sounds like, you're in one of those 4 categories. And it's true that we would predominantly be in one of these categories. That, yeah, predominantly I have a lot of weeds in my life, or predominantly, my soil is rocky, or my soil is just hard packed. But once you understand the principles here, it becomes very clear that we have all these different kinds of soils in our lives. At any one moment, I have soil that is hard packed, that is rocky. In other areas, it's rocky. And then in other areas, it's got weeds. And in some areas, God has been able to help me cultivate it and create the good soil for his word to be planted. So it's important that we understand that. Again, as I mentioned with the seasons, we're so used to thinking in that chronological time-based thing where, okay, winter, then spring, then summer, then fall, whereas you can be in all 4 of those seasons at once because they apply to different areas of your life. And it's the same thing with these soils. And so Jesus, in explaining this kingdom principle about sowing and reaping, in Mark chapter 4, he gives another story, which we will look at in depth further down the road, but I just want to mention it to you today because it further illustrates our involvement in this process. Because in this particular story, this is Mark 4:26 through 29, Jesus says that the kingdom of God is like a man who casts seed upon the soil. In Matthew 13, he's talking about the sower who sows the seed. Now, the sower, of course, is Jesus. But in this parable, he's talking about a man who casts seed upon the soil. And he goes to bed at night and gets up by day, and the seed sprouts and grows. How? He himself does not know. Right back then, they had no clue about the biological process of a seed germinating and growing. They just knew you plant the seed, and lo and behold, in a week or two, you see them, sprouting. And Jesus goes on to say the soil produces crops by itself, first the blade, then the head, then the mature grain in the head. But when the crop permits, he, the man, immediately puts in the sickle because the harvest has come. So this parable basically is, amplifying the principle that we have to be involved in the process of planting seed and watching it grow till the harvest comes. Okay? So the first part of that responsibility has to do with recognizing where we have the different kinds of soils in our lives. Where's the fallow ground? Where is the area in my life where I've just basically settled for a status quo existence, right? It's like, yeah, well, this is all I've got. This is my life, on the negative side. And on the positive, oh, I'm just so blessed. I'm just, in the presence of God all day long. And, again, that's great, but that's a seasonal thing. And you're supposed to move out of that season into the spring times, where you plan for productivity, not neglecting the times of, intimacy with the Lord. I'm not suggesting that, of course. But maturity means there's a balance in all of these things, right? So again, our first responsibility in understanding the process that Jesus is laying out here for us in his parables is to really assess, okay, what kind of soil do I have in my life? And the first part of that's all I want to focus on this morning, is, do we have fallow ground? Is there fallow ground? In other words, have I just simply settled for a low level of existence, a low level of purpose in my life where really there is none? I don't feel like there's any purpose to my life other than I've just got to go through the motions every day to do what I'm doing, right? And that's all there is, right? What's that old song? Is that all there is, my friends? Oh my goodness, these references that pop into my head out of nowhere. But that's, what we're talking about here. And the Lord is saying, it's time to break up that fallow ground. It's time to get in there and say, no, I am not going to settle for less. I am not going to be satisfied with a mediocre life when God has created each of us for greatness. Okay, go back and read Psalm 139 and understand what God has done for us, that he has absolutely created us fearfully and wonderfully. And in his book are written all the days of our lives when there were not even yet one of them. Okay? And that means that he knows exactly what he's after when it comes to why we're here on this earth. And yes, I will once again make a shameless plug for those of you who would like to delve deeply into Psalm 139. I've written a book that covers that psalm from the standpoint of mapping your spiritual DNA, because that's what's really there in that psalm. It's an expose on the spiritual DNA that God created every single one of us with. And if you go through the book and you do the activations that are in every chapter, you will uncover your DNA and begin to function in it. You can pick the book up on Amazon, either the paperback version or the Kindle version. That little link right there will take you right to the page, but you can also search for it, Mapping Your Spiritual DNA. But bit.ly/mapping DNA gets you right there. And so feel free to check that out. So that's really what I wanted to share with you this morning about, this fallow ground, that we need to recognize where we've been settling for less in our lives. And maybe to get a little bit angry about how we've been lulled into that place of satisfaction with the status quo, and how the enemy, has been successful to basically rob us of passion, of a determination to become all that Jesus paid for us to become, right? You need to get stirred up in your spirit about this and say, no, I am not going to settle for less, because Lord, you deserve to get everything you paid for in my life and out of my life. And I want you to have that. I want you to get the most glory that I can give you by living a life that is full of my purpose and my destiny. I've released that kind of passion into your life today, that you would get stirred up to say, yeah, God, I'm going after all of that and more. I'm not going to stay satisfied with what I have known, because you have more. There's always more. He is the God of more. So let's do that together, shall we? All right, let me say good morning to the rest of my breakfast club. Look at all you guys here. You're just so amazing. Let's jump in here to say good morning to Laura and Ellen and Lois. Theodora, welcome. I don't think I've seen your name here before. Glad to have you along. Sarai, good to have you back as well. Jill, Evelise, Ralph and Rosa. Let's see. Deborah, Peggy, how are you? How are you and your hubby doing there in Florida? It's been a long time. Let's see. Who else have we got? Yeah, thank you, Lord. I'm trying to make sure I don't miss any of you. Sometimes these names just kind of go, ah. Gloria, Jeanette, I think that's a new name as well. Welcome. Callie, and who else? I think I got you all. If I missed you, please forgive me. I do try hard to make sure I catch all the names, but thank you so very much for spending some time with me today. I hope this has been helpful for you. And listen, I just am so grateful to those of you who are sharing this with your friends, either on Facebook or in other ways, because there you go. We got some new folks jumping in, and that's a wonderful thing. So listen, have an awesome day, and man, get them spiritual spades out, and let's get digging, shall we? I'll see you back here tomorrow, 8:30 Eastern. Thanks so much.